now. Okay, great. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Kelsey in just a moment, but just a reminder that you can go ahead and put questions in the chat as she's talking, but we'll also open it up at the end for the last 20 or 30 minutes, and we can just have a nice discussion afterwards as well. And we also have Chris Blanchard here, who is part of indieDwell, so we can ask both of them questions at the end. All right, Kelsey, take it away.
And because I always love to embarrass Ron Francis, if you have any questions about the Pueblo facility, he's here and he can soothe us with his beautiful British accent. So I always like to include that. Let me share my screen real quick. Moving over. And there we go.
Looks
Sweet.
good.
This is my first Zoom presentation, so bear with me on this. So we're going to talk about building resilient communities today. First off, thank you everyone for having me here. I'm super excited to have this talk. As you know, my name's Kelsey. I'm the project coordinator. We are a modular home manufacturer based in Boise, and we do have an additional nonprofit facility located in Pueblo, Colorado. So we are definitely expanding. It's getting bigger. So to give a quick backstory on indieDwell, we're a B Corp, which is a business model that works towards reducing inequality, lower levels of poverty, a healthier environment, stronger communities, and the creation of more high quality jobs with dignity and purpose. indieDwell's mission as a modular home builder is to revolutionize the building industry by producing dwellings that better occupant health and well-being, improve the health of the environment, and empower the community. As a company, our ideal partners are nonprofits and developers focused on providing low-income housing and permanent supportive housing for those in need. As of this past year, we've also addressed another need through the creation of our rapid rehousing products. Something I want to point out with this presentation, I'm going to try really hard to not make it about indieDwell because we're just such a small part of the puzzle for addressing homelessness. So as Carson mentioned, I'm currently one semester from graduating with a Master's of Arts degree in emergency management. So let me move to the next slide. This is one that we didn't, come on, there we go. So with this background in mind, it's kind of been the way that I've developed this presentation today. In the EM field, FEMA identifies 5 steps of emergency management, which include mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and prevention. The main topic of this presentation falls into the response step with regards to addressing homelessness during the coronavirus pandemic through the use of rapid rehousing. Using the example of the Evans Lane housing project and the Leghorn Mountain View projects in California, we'll see how the housing community is creating innovative solutions to get homeless people housed. But I would be remiss as someone in the emergency management field if I also didn't talk about mitigation, preparedness, and how we can make our communities more resilient. Of course, Slack's always up. So, of course, my email is coming through too. Hopefully you guys aren't seeing that. Okay, so when I think about what it takes to build a resilient community, I automatically think about the people who live there and what are the basic necessities that they need: food, water, and shelter. In the United States, we have an incredible issue in that there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who do not have the basic necessities of shelter. Pre-pandemic, it was estimated that just under 600,000 Americans were in some state of homelessness. And breaking that down, that's just around 30% of that is families and 17% of that is individuals who are considered chronically homeless. And when you think about chronically homeless individuals, you think of the people that have been on the streets for longer than a year and that are more likely that once they are housed to consider to go back out and live on the streets. So that's a really key demographic that we're working with here. So the pandemic has exacerbated this issue of homelessness with unprecedented job losses due to temporary business and community closures. More people are being forced onto the streets. This problem is inevitably going to get worse in the coming months as states lift restrictions and individuals currently benefiting from eviction moratoriums in place will be in positions to be evicted. people who are currently housed who are behind on rent and house payments will potentially move to the streets. More people are being forced into homelessness, which is causing shelters to become overcrowded. And as we're experiencing right now, that is creating super spreader situations that communities are forced to address. States like California began addressing overcrowding in an attempt to stop the spread of COVID-19 by housing individuals in hotels paid for through FEMA and state funding. But through the use of CARES Act funding, local jurisdictions are now coming up with new plans to address housing during the pandemic. Because of the unique circumstances of the pandemic, cities like Mountain View and San Jose, California, decided to use their funding to partner with different businesses to rapidly rehouse some of their homeless populations. The Evans Lane Housing Project in San Jose began as a way to create 100 homes, 100 people housed in 100 days on a vacant piece of property within the city. The Leghorn project, which you see on the screen, was inspired by a similar mission. We participated in both of these amazing rapid rehousing projects, but let's break down how the partnerships were required to make this happen. The format of these housing projects required modular builders to come together to provide sleeping units, which contains bedrooms and bathrooms, a community kitchen, and a community area for other living activities. These projects are built on vacant, unused properties within the city, offering single-family units, individual units, and ADA compliant units. One of the biggest benefits of rehousing with modular homes is the site development can occur in parallel with modular build as they're being built in the factory. It's also cost-effective labor-wise to build in the factory, allows faster install times, and does not encounter the same weather delays that you would experience on a regular construction project. And I just want to point out, I saw Lisa Hilbrand's jump on this. She's been with one of our partners, Anderson Construction, for College of Idaho project. And regular construction companies are starting to see the benefit of pre-manufactured housing. The housing that's out on, I believe, off of 10 Mile, they are starting to pre-manufacture walls and have everything set up so that it creates a faster build time. So modular really does seem to be one of the ways of the future. For the Leghorn project, indieDwell of Colorado provided 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 320 square foot rapid rehousing shipping containers for single residents and individuals requiring ADA accessible accommodations. And this is kind of the exterior of what these rapid rehousing modules looked like on our end. They were fully customizable with doors and finishes and things like that. And here's what the floor plan looked like. So this includes 2 living areas with separate entrances, as you can see. They're completely private for individuals. Each unit features room for a double bed, an in-unit wash basin, and a separate lavatory and shower. Each unit also features its own HVAC system, an energy recovery ventilator, which assists in filtering the air within the unit. So one of the big things, as I pointed out earlier with indieDwell, we like to be environmentally conscious and make these houses healthy. Falcon Structures out of Austin, Texas, provided the community centers where residents could spend time outside of the bedroom units with strict social distancing in place, of course. Union Block built the community kitchens and dining facilities for residents. These projects also included play areas for children who lived on the premises. So one of the statement from the Leghorn website on this project is this: with rooms for up to 100 households, the Leghorn site will provide beds for approximately 124 people at a time. Specifically, the site will provide triple the existing number of shelter beds available in Mountain View in winter and 10 times the number of year-round beds. Most importantly, with full occupancy on the site, will provide immediate shelter for over 20% of the 606 people experiencing homeless in Mountain View, and over half of Mountain View's homeless population within the first year. So what we've seen with these rapid rehousing projects is, you know, we think of this temporary housing for homeless people during the pandemic. People need to be brought off the streets, brought out of these shelters so that they can social distance and help stop the spread of COVID-19. But these can then transition once the pandemic is quote unquote over into more permanent supportive housing for these individuals. So this is not one-time housing. This is something that can be ongoing housing as opposed to shelters. So these are great. These have wraparound services, food is supplied, playgrounds, obviously. This is actually pictures from our Evans Lane project. It's very similar to the mission and what we did for the Leghorn project. So some of the questions that come up when looking at providing this sort of rapid rehousing include where will the units be situated and how will they be powered? I was recently in conversation with Idaho's regional TSA officials, and they have a problem that when disaster strikes, TSA employees experience homelessness. As a way to fix this, they're interested in setting up rapid rehousing on airport tarmacs to provide housing to their employees and families. But how would this work? For foundations, companies such as Multi-Point Solutions have an answer. They've created a mobile foundation that can be set up and leveled in just about any situation. They are made of steel framing, are easily transportable, and can be either permanent or temporary as a foundation. The benefit of using a foundation like this is that it negates the need for foundation permitting and to go through state and local levels to get a permanent foundation put in place. So to address power needs, Australian company Blackstump has created mobile solar panel systems that can be set up within 10 minutes of being on site. I wanted to share this video. I don't generally like to do videos and presentations, but I think that this one is really powerful and it's only about a minute long. So I'm gonna play this for you guys. So yeah, so that how cool would it be to be able to provide energy on site within 10 minutes without having to rely on generator power? So our modules right now, the way they're set up is they hook into local power, but as we get more in depth with rapid rehousing and it becomes a bigger thing than what it already is, we're gonna need power sources in place that can be rapidly deployable, can be used on multiple different sites, and can provide instant power. So this one would be really great in California, for example, that has a lot of really pretty sunshine. That would be able to power these communities. So another company that we've seen come out of this, especially when medical units are needed, is Rockbox. They have a more dignified approach to pop-up medical care than the makeshift tents that you generally see. So the top left one is actually one of their medical facilities that they do deploy to different sites. So instead of having people line up outside of a tent, they can actually go in and have customizable real healthcare at a moment's notice. Other cool things that they do is mobile kitchens, and then they also do solar refrigerators and freezers, which would come really in handy as we go through the pandemic with needing to keep the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines cold. I don't know if you guys can see this guy because this guy is in the way, but yeah. So power supply and build issues are some of the biggest reasons why states fall back on the use of hotels or RVs and travel trailers to provide housing during disasters. Personal story, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was working for an RV dealership and trailer sales began to skyrocket. A lot of it was people wanting to get off the grid, but another part of it was communities, state and local governments wanting to provide housing to people, to doctors and things throughout the COVID pandemic. So in California specifically, 3,000 trailers were sold by Gander RV and Camping World to the state of California to provide housing during this time period. But trailers are not considered sustainable housing. They're difficult to maintain in a lot of cases, especially in humid climates. They're unsanitary and they're not well built enough to have a sustainable shelf life. They're expensive to maintain in the future with seal jobs and all of the different maintenance that you need to do on them. Modular housing has been proven to be more cost-effective to build, and as seen with the Leghorn and Evans Lane project, the rapid rehousing model through multiple partnerships provides sustainable quality housing that can be transitioned to permanent supportive housing as the pandemic ends. And with companies such as Multi-Point Solutions and Blackstump, deploying housing is becoming easier every single day. So like I said earlier, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the concept of mitigation. So how do we mitigate the need for rapid rehousing? The answer is actually really surprisingly simple, and I don't think it's a radical idea. It's provide people with homes, right? And there's a couple different ways that I'd like to highlight to do this. So first, we need to address the lack of affordable housing. And to do this, I want to talk about Idaho specifically. Currently, right now, as it stands, there is not enough affordable housing in the state of Idaho, especially in the Boise metropolitan areas. So for rent, the average two-bedroom home in Idaho is roughly $1,300 per month. In metropolitan areas such as Boise, that number is much higher. As someone who's currently living on the Boise bench right now, the rental estimate on a two-bedroom apartment in my neighborhood is at least $1,600 to $1,800 per month. The average wage of renters in Idaho is $13.26 an hour, and to afford $1,300 per month rent, not including utilities, someone in Idaho would need to make roughly $16.59 per hour to afford rent. And I throw afford in quotation marks because this number does not meet the 33% income threshold that most reputable apartment complexes require to sign a lease. According to Zillow, the average home in Idaho costs $360,000. But once again, in the metro areas where the jobs are, the numbers are much higher. I don't think you can buy a house in Boise right now that is a good quality house that is not essentially a dump to live in without spending over $450,000 to $500,000. To help address affordable housing in the state, we partner with a nonprofit called Leap Housing Solutions. I really value this partnership because they provide not only environmentally friendly, high quality housing, but their rentals are reserved for low income families who otherwise would not be able to afford adequate housing. So this project that's on the screen right now, this is the Leap Aries project, which is the first project that Leap has done in Canyon County. And it was surprisingly difficult to get this project approved through city council and the community to okay it being built. This was built on a single family residence lot. So we're now able to house two different families on the same footprint that used to house one family. And LEAP requires you to be below, I think, the 50% median income in order to qualify for housing through them. So this was a really exciting project that just wrapped up. We have the first family that's moved in already, and we're getting ready to have the second family move in. So LEAP has also set up what's called a community land trust. The upcoming Caritas Commons development will follow in the footsteps of two earlier projects in providing affordable home ownership in Boise. So LEAP identifies the Treasure Valley Housing Trust as a shared equity model, also known as a community land trust. In this model, homeowners own their homes and the land is owned by the trust in order to guarantee perpetual affordability, even when someone sells. Shared equity homeownership is a self-sustaining model that balances wealth building for families who would otherwise be unable to afford owning a home by preserving the community's investment. In return for buying a home below its market value rate, the family agrees to limit in the equity when they sell. This first family shares their equity by paying it forward. So that's such a unique concept, right? With people with having land ownership, having this land ownership trust set in place allows future generations to keep this property affordable. So I think that this is really key, especially in the Boise area, to creating affordable housing. So affordable housing is the first step. The next step is addressing those who are already homeless. As I said earlier, the only way to end homelessness is to get people housed. This is happening right now in the Compton area of Los Angeles, where our partners at Daylight Community Development are currently in construction to provide 4 separate permanent supportive housing buildings. These multi-story developments are being built on previously single residence lots and will offer not only housing, but counseling, community-based healthcare, treatment, and employment training for those housed. This is not temporary shelter, but instead provides a permanent safe place for the homeless in need. And something that I like to point out, the difference between permanent supportive housing and actual shelters, permanent supportive housing gives you an address, right? So when you go and you fill out job applications and you live in a shelter, you don't have an address where you can receive mail at in order to put on your job application. And then each morning when you go to work, if you do have a job and you live in a shelter, you're taking your housing accommodations with you. So while they're providing shelter for you overnight to sleep and get you out of the elements, they're not providing the wraparound supports that a lot of chronically homeless individuals need to reintegrate within the community. So I get a little choked up when I tell this story. Ron Francis is the same. I think we all take a lot of this really seriously into heart. So I want to tell you guys a story that was really inspirational to me. We have a newer employee who's working out of the Pueblo factory as we speak. A few weeks after starting, he came to work with us. He came to work with a story. He has a friend in Los Angeles, California, who's fallen on hard times. He hasn't been able to find work in the area since the pandemic began and has been homeless, living in and out of shelters. His friend called him one day, excited because a housing project was going in near where he was staying. This place would provide permanent housing, job training, and would really be there to help him get back on his feet. When asked what the project was by the employee, he said, "It's the Wattsworks project." This employee got to tell his friend that right this second, he was building the home that his friend was going to live in. So this is the Wattsworks project currently going in. It'll be installed in Compton, California. I believe it's Compton. It's off of Compton Avenue. These are 20-foot storage container units that will be permanent supportive housing. So yeah, his friend is getting to build the housing that he's going to get to live in. The Wattsworks project will consist of 25 permanent supportive housing units. This project is currently in production at the Pueblo, Colorado facility, and the first floor will be delivered as of the 19th of March. These homes are built out of shipping containers with high quality quartz countertops, custom cabinetry, ERV systems to ensure the highest air quality, and environmentally friendly appliances in place to reduce utility costs. This place will be healthier and better built than many of yours and my own homes. This is literally, these are better built than the house that I currently live in. So the next projects include the Mahalia, which will provide 49 housing units, the McDaniel House, which will have 47 units, and Oatsy's Place, which will consist of 46 housing units. Daylight, outside of the partnership with indieDwell, is also building a 98-unit permanent supportive housing development, which will specifically house women experiencing homelessness. So these are all going in within California. And one thing that I would like to point out on this is these are going on lots that previously had single family homes on them. So it's not taking a large expanded amount of property to do these. These can be brought onto, I think they're called infill lots within the community. So these large scale multifamily units are not the only way in which we can provide permanent supportive housing. We also have an amazing partnership with the United Hope Builders, a nonprofit in East Palo Alto. We cut the ribbon at the beginning of February on the first pair of what we hope will be many modular homes built to house homeless families within the area. From the start of concept to the certificate of occupancy where residents were able to move in, I believe planning for this started in September, and we had people housed by the middle of February. So we made it through the permit process was able to happen simultaneously as the architecture and engineering process. The foundation installation process was able to occur simultaneously with the production process. And then at that point, we were just able to install these units. So this project was made possible by a partnership between United Hope Builders, indieDwell, Firm Foundation, and CoBuild. Those were the four major groups that worked together to make this possible. So these highlighted projects are just the beginning of what's to come and are a small step for what needs to happen to combat homelessness. Through strong community partnerships and conscientious property development, we can get people off the streets and build stronger communities. If you are looking for how you can help with the issue of homelessness, look into donating to nonprofits that provide permanent supportive housing and low-income community housing options. So I have a couple of them on here that we specifically work with, but there are so many more. Like I said, it really takes a tribe to address this serious issue. So I guess we're now to the point where we can go through questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey. That was so interesting. And it's just really cool to see the work that you guys are doing and other groups are doing related to this issue. I'll start with a question, and then feel free to, anybody in the audience, if you want to turn your videos on and ask some questions, feel free, or you can pop them in the chat. So I'd just be curious if you could talk a little bit about, like, for a specific project, like, what does that process look like? Who kind of like contacts you initially? How do you like figure out where it's going to be, the land, like how's it getting funded, and just kind of like walk us through sort of the arc of a project? I'd just be curious to know more.
So I'm actually going to defer the first part of this question to Chris, because he's the beginning of all of these projects, right? He's the one making the contact. And then once the contract is signed, I'll go into what that process looks like.
Unmute. There we go. Oh, thanks, Kelsey. And Carson, thanks for the question. Yeah, I do the sales and marketing. And so usually I'm the first point of contact. I was not that on the San Jose project, but I can walk you through how that one happened there. We've been working with United Hope Builders project. We help people that Kelsey identified, and a local pastor in the area named Pastor Paul Baines, and he has a lot of contacts throughout the Bay Area. So he really was the one who helped us with that project. He was familiar with us and the work we were doing in modular housing, and he just kind of helped put the pieces together. And the pieces of that puzzle, like most affordable housing projects, are pretty complex. This stuff just doesn't happen where you get a piece of dirt and you throw up a building and it's magically affordable. It doesn't happen like that. So in this case, the city of San Jose had a piece of property in their surplus inventory that they wanted to activate, but they hadn't on their own power been able to put all the pieces together. So Pastor Baines identified a funding source in Sand Hill community properties there. So I think out of both philanthropic good and frustration, the CEO of the foundation said, "Hey, look, if you guys, City of San Jose, will throw in this land to the project, I will pay for the units that we can put on there." So Sand Hill Properties made a donation to East Palo Alto Habitat for Humanity, and Habitat for Humanity in turn bought the units from us. So we delivered the units, and then Habitat did all the installation over there. And then of course, the final piece of the puzzle is getting an operator to operate that whole thing. And I'm blanking on the name of the organization that does this, but there are organizations out there that just do the operation of these. So they do the cooking, the provision, the service, they get medical and social work and job counseling and all that kind of thing. I see another question about permanent supportive housing. So, and they call those wraparound services. So that's kind of the way these projects begin. And then Kelsey, really once once I have helped put the whole thing together, I hand it off and it goes to project management, which goes to Kelsey, and she can talk about how that comes together on the ground. The short story is with great difficulty.
Thanks, Chris. So once a contract is signed, it goes into architecture and engineering, which begins the state permitting process. Modular builds are governed by state permitting as opposed to local jurisdiction. So that really takes some of the guesswork out of the build process. Anytime a local building inspector comes out, we can generally fall back on this was approved by the state, this follows state policies. So it gets us out of kind of that tangled web of local jurisdictional politics. So during that A&E process, we get state approved permitting. Those plans go to the local jurisdiction for site built things such as roofing or foundations, and that goes into permitting as well. So that usually takes, I would say, probably about 6 to 8 weeks for a single family. It's much longer for a commercial build. But then while on site, they're building the foundations and doing the site work and excavation. We're building those modules in the factory. So usually I would say it takes between 18 and 24 stops. Does that sound right, Chris?
Stops in our factory?
Yeah. I think that the most that I've seen is a 24 stop, and it's a stop per day. So 5 days a week, you can get through 18 stops in 18 working days. So that
was stop. I'm not familiar with that.
So the first stop right now with the product that we're building is we're doing the cutouts for the welding, right? So we begin cutting out the containers. The next stop is probably welding in the different bracing and stuff required to make these a structurally sound, once you've made the cuts out, the structurally sound portion, and then you can go into framing, and then you go into interior work, and each stop is just a different day. So we can get one module out, so one rapid rehousing module out every 18 days, and it's 18, and then the next one's out the next day, the next one's out the next day, the next one's out the next day. So they get built, they get delivered to the site, we crane them onto the foundations, we get those connected, and as with the We Hope project, we are able to get full certificate of occupancy within 3 to 4 weeks of delivering the modules. So it significantly cuts down the process time for getting people housed.
Cool, thank you so much. Okay, so we have a couple questions here in the chat. So Deb asks for permanent supportive housing in California projects, could you repeat the services that are provided in addition to protecting shelters, counseling, etc.?
I guess I'm not understanding that question.
Deb, are you in the audience? Do you want to elaborate? Let's see.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, thank you. Oops, I just heard you mention that in those projects in California, that you mentioned that there were other services that were provided with the housing unit itself. You mentioned counseling, but I didn't catch the other items.
So they're offering counseling, they're offering on-site medical services, they are offering job training and job aids. And then the key point of permanent supportive housing is there's not a timeline to kick you out. So you're not there for 6 months, you've done good, now you go out back into the world. This is housing that's in place for you as long as you need it until you're good enough to transition out into the community on your own. Okay. So it's full wraparound services. They do have on-site management as well to make that run the property. It's not just people living in an apartment facility. There are on-site resources specifically for them.
Great, that's what I was wanting to hear again. Thank you.
All right, let's see. Next question is from Amy Mole. So how is plumbing handled in the fast building modular communities with the triodetic multi-point foundations? I don't know what that means. So maybe you could define what that means and then you can answer that question.
Chris, do you want to field this one or do you want me to field it?
Oh, sure. I'll jump in real quick. So, thanks, Amy, on that question. Amy, if I remember, is in construction management over there, aren't you, Professor Mull? Yeah. Anyways, when you build modularly, all of the MEPs, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing are signed off in the factory. So we don't have to do on site. The only thing we have to get signed off on site is the actual connection of the utilities, but otherwise all the plumbing, electrical, and mechanical stuff is signed off by the inspector in our factory. So that's the first piece. The nice thing about the multi-point foundations, it gives you an easy space to work in. So if you're not building a foundation, or you're not in California, they use a lot of slab on grade, which is kind of frankly an intensive way to build. We usually put stuff on conditioned crawl spaces, but it makes it a nice, easy way to work underneath the units for sure, and they can be rapidly deployed. The other thing that's happening in the rapid rehousing space, obviously, is trying to reduce the number of sewer and water and electrical connections. So there's going to be a move on, I think, to convert most of the living spaces to just sleep pods. That way you're not having to connect every one of these units to sewer. And then just having like a common laundry area, a common eating area, a common shower and bathroom area. So I think that's kind of one of the other things that's happening to try to reduce these the number of connections we have to make out in the field. Is that somewhere in there? Amy's on there still somewhere. She can say yay or nay.
Well, Amy, if you have further questions, feel free to unmute and continue to ask. Okay, another question here is from Joaquin. So are these houses financially viable for Boise for small buildings, 5 to 9 units? What is the approximate cost per unit? And do you have partners in Idaho for small buildings?
Chris, this is all you, bud.
Thanks, guys. Joaquin, I would say a couple of things on this is, it depends. I'm a social scientist, right? So the answer is always it depends. And the thing that makes modular work the best, frankly, is in areas where labor and land costs are extremely high, or that labor is just non-existent. So in California, you have instances where, you know, framers, whether it's in San Diego, LA, or San Francisco, are making $60 an hour. And I can pay a framer in Caldwell $18 an hour. And then even with the shipping costs, and that's a livable wage here. And then even with shipping costs, you know, it's still not eating up the savings. And so typically those kind of places like the California market do really well economically. I would say right now in Boise, we still, even though I would say we're at the very bottom end of the labor market as far as quality of labor and availability of labor right now, there still is labor available to build things here. And land, again, relatively, the real estate market is a global market now, and investors aren't just sitting around going, what can I build in Boise? They're saying, what can I invest in that's going to get me the cap rate I want? So it doesn't matter if it's Minnesota or China or whatever. And so right now, I think Boise is not the greatest market for modular housing, unless it's got some kind of subsidy attached to it. And so that's where LEAP is really successful in getting low-income housing tax credits, or in the Caritas project that Kelsey talked about. St. Al's actually came in as a community partner, and they actually bought the land that we're putting Caritas on and then donated that land to the land trust. And so that's a way to make units affordable, is through subsidy. The other thing that we can do is we've spec'd a couple of units in Idaho, and when you build one of our previous models, a house that we did was called the Model 9. It was 960 square feet. It had 4 bedrooms and 2 baths, but still a 960 square feet. It's not going to comp like a normal house. So I think when the last one of those we did sold in the market for 260, and that was this time last year. I think it's sitting at about 330 if I look on Zillow now, but that's still considerably under what the median average home price is in the Valley right now. So that's a way that we can build naturally occurring affordable housing, is just by right sizing the product. And then, so yeah, for smaller, just building smaller buildings, you know, we are a B2B provider, right? So we sell boxes to developers. The cost is kind of hard to say. Just if you're like total back of the napkin, like usually some kind of unit is, you know, probably $100,000 shipped to the site, and then by the time it's all said and done, you double that, and that's what your your cost is. So if somebody came and said, what's it roughly going to cost for 12 units? I'd be like, well, it's probably, 1.2 million on our side. And then, all the rest of the construction costs probably double. So you're probably 2.4 million. And that's my total. That's a 5 to 10% accurate quote. Obviously you have to get into design before you really know what you're doing, but that's, we're commensurate with building prices, which are for multifamily, probably about $230 a foot. That's about the national average. And we're somewhere around there.
Thank you, Chris. All right, Leela asks, what are the barriers indieDwell faces in the entitlement process? You mentioned some difficulty getting council approval in Canyon County. How did that process go?
So it's funny that Carson and I were kind of talking about this with that homeless shelter that's going in Boise right now, with having a lot of community fight back on it. I don't know why it's such like a dirty concept of low income housing. I think that ethically, like, everyone deserves to be housed. I don't think it's controversial. And I don't know. If you think it's controversial, I think you're wrong. That's a hard line that I'll take with that. With specifically the NAMPA process, it was a lot about educating and getting members of the community on our side. With the LEAP project, for example, we had it was originally contracted to do like awning parking. That was still technically attached to the building, and listening to community input, we put in an actual garage. So that was something with kind of meeting concessions of the community to talk them into it. And then a lot of the times when people see our product and see what it looks like, it doesn't look like shipping containers on a piece of property necessarily. They look like houses. In a lot of ways, they're imperceptible once they're fully built with roofs. You can't tell the difference. Chris, you know more about the LEAP project or some of the entitlement issues. You've been working up in Haley, as well as, I believe, McCall for some affordable housing.
I'll just chime in quickly on the Nampa project. Was it was an interesting one because LEAP went to the city of Nampa and asked them to contribute some of their CDBG, Community Development Block Grant funds to this project. And it was kind of it doesn't sound like that would be a radical ask, but strangely enough, cities have not considered housing as infrastructure. It's a bizarre statement to all of us probably, but they just really haven't contributed those funds to housing projects. So LEAP asked for some CDBG funds to be contributed. And so it was one thing that it was housing, but the other thing, frankly, was just the conservative nature of the Nampa City Council, who just thought it was just frankly a ridiculous subsidy, and they just didn't want to participate in it. So we actually had members of the Nampa City Council, the mayor and the chief of staff and everything through the facility, so we could talk about our mission and what we're doing. It really became quite a tempest in a teapot, I tell you, for the tiny amount of money that they actually contributed. So that was that specific case. Really, entitlement, frankly, is pretty easy. We're a modular builder that builds to international residential or IBC code, so it's not like a manufactured house. So again, entitlement is really normally pretty easy. This was just a case where the Nampa City Council just didn't frankly see the value in investing in housing in their community.
Thank you. Kind of going off that question, I guess, what do you think the role of communication is in all of this, in changing perceptions? Or Kelsey, you were mentioning, there's this idea maybe that homeless people don't deserve housing the same way that other people do. And so how do you kind of think about that and shift those perceptions? And yeah.
Well, I think it starts with talks like this, right? Where we're engaging, we're thinking about how are we housing homeless people? And then I think it really gets back to, always go back to emergency management, because that's how my brain processes. I go back to how do we mitigate so it's not as expensive later on. Something that interests me about that shelter getting built in Boise and people asking about their housing prices dropping. Well, think of how much their housing prices will improve as we start to get people off the streets. Boise land will just go up. I mean, we're continuing to go up, but it's just conversations that people need to start having. I think the world is slowly becoming more empathetic over time. We're leaving that mindset of taking care of yourself and only taking care of yourself. We're raising empathetic children. We're challenging the status quo with this. And I think that that's just what needs to happen. People need to be not afraid to have these hard conversations and not be afraid to call people on their BS when they claim that housing the homeless isn't important. So it's a lot of education. It's a lot of having conversations, and it's a lot about being open-minded.
Yeah, thank you. I like that answer. I think it's really important. Britt, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I just love how you put all of this in the context of emergency management. And I know there are several people on this call that are particularly appreciative of that. I've been having some conversations with our Ada County Emergency Management Office about risk in the flood zones and thinking about recovery capacity and having to move people or displace people semi-permanently from flood zones and from flood events, or even doing some sort of cost benefit analysis where you buy out the properties in the flood zones and you relocate them, especially those lower income communities, like the manufactured homes communities, which don't even qualify for flood insurance because they're manufactured homes, right? So convincing communities, cities, counties to invest in taking those communities and actually moving them into something that's affordable, local. I don't even know what my question is. It's just how do you navigate something like that in terms of a cost benefit analysis and getting community buy-in and really getting people to want to move out of their region.
I really wish that I personally had a good answer for that, because that's the question that I face every single day too, right? When you think of in the emergency management profession, we're making these properties that are within the flood zones cheaper and more affordable to live, which is why more affordable housing gets built there, and why people are moving there is because the property values are cheaper. I think that I don't know, I'm a fan of tax credits to incentivize people to either do mitigation tactics within their properties. I think they've talked about it a little bit in the South with providing tax credits to low-income families who need to put their homes on stilts. I think that there's a lot of incentivization that we can do to homeowners and builders, but it also comes down to building codes, right? And enforcing building codes in the community. We really need to staff our building code departments appropriately and make sure, because a lot of these cases are houses that aren't built to code and don't meet requirements, which is why they're so vulnerable. And there's just not staffing available to address this. So it's beyond just building low income housing, right? It's about picking the appropriate areas to build in, putting it on good land that's not going to be damaged further down the road, and ensuring that insurance companies are incentivized to provide flood insurance in those areas.
Thank
I
you.
wonder, like, would FEMA be willing to invest in something like this when they're the ones that potentially buy out the homes after they've flooded several times, or the properties?
So the problem with FEMA funding in this regard is that FEMA likes to look at critical infrastructure. And as Chris pointed out, housing in a lot of areas is not considered infrastructure. For example, their generator program, if you have group homes with elderly that are on, hospice care, those in a lot of areas aren't considered critical infrastructure. So they're not going to provide funding for that. So if you lose power in those areas, those people could die, plain and simple. But the way that the funding is currently set up, they just don't focus on that. FEMA as a whole is starting to transition over into mitigation. I think that's a big part of what you guys are participating in now, as well as we get more into what the emergency management science is. But right now there's just not enough emphasis, and there hasn't been enough community buy-in on mitigation tactics like that. Not in my backyard, yeah.
We can get to Emily's question in just a second. I think there's a really important one from Rob Litchell, who's BSU's emergency manager. How important is locating the housing close to accessible public transportation? Some locations might be cheaper further away from city centers, but might not have easy access to transport.
So a really cool project that we're doing, and I didn't put this in my presentation, it's called Shelton's Veteran Village. And in order to receive the funding that they're receiving, it has to be near public transportation. So one of the ways that a lot of these nonprofits are meeting with that is they're doing bike programs. So residents have access to bicycles to be able to commute around. They're building bike paths within the community that access to local urban trails, as well as finding property and partnering and getting donations to subsidize the property costs of building areas that are accessible to public transportation, because homeless people don't have cars. I mean, maybe some of them do, but that's what they're living out of. You know, they don't have the money necessarily for bus passes. So nonprofits are subsidizing bus passes in a lot of these facilities. I know that the Watts Works project, they're subsidizing transportation costs for the residents living there. So bus passes and local transportation is part of the package of permanent supportive housing. So it's critical. You can't build, I think there was a project potentially out by a garbage dump, and we're like, we can't build there because that's not gonna be, it's not accessible to anything. You don't have grocery stores, you don't have, gas stations, you don't have all of these necessary accommodations, hospitals, medical care, jobs. It's one of the reasons why the Boise's housing market bothers me so much. As happy as we are that all of our housing prices are going up, it's forcing people out into communities where they don't have jobs. They have to drive 40 or 50 minutes to get into their work every day. That's just not sustainable, and it's not equitable. And I think that's a really key thing to point out.
If I can just chime in real quick, Carson. Yeah, the 4 projects, I know Watts specifically, but I think all 4 projects in Los Angeles that we're doing, the Watts project was a dilapidated or abandoned single family house on a 5,000 square foot lot. So we're putting 24 units on a 5,000 square foot lot. It's right on a bus stop. And we actually permitted that thing with no parking, none, not a single space. And I think that was all 4 of those buildings that we're building down there. And we were able to do that, 1, because homeless people don't have cars, and 2, because it's on transit routes. So we're starting to see all across the country the focus on developing on transit lines, and cities starting to give more and more incentives to developers if they're going to locate stuff. Incentives, i.e. not building parking because it's expensive. So that's happening more and more. And the garbage dump one is funny. That one came out of St. Mary's, Idaho, where we, through the Department of Commerce and LEAP, worked with them because they're in a desperate situation where they can't grow any of their businesses. They can't attract workers or residents to the area because there's nowhere to live. So they came up with this parcel that was like, 8 or 9 miles out of town, that was like basically a reclaimed garbage dump. And Bart and I from LEAP were like, well, that is just like, how do we sell this, right? It's 8 or 9 miles out of town, so it's close to nothing. And then second, it's a reclaimed garbage dump. And I mean, what are we saying about dignity, when we try to put residents into something like that? So that is a true story. I'm surprised you remembered that one, Kelsey. But anyways, we're sure trying, but we're not going to do garbage dumps.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's just so important to think about all the different intricacies that go with where you live that kind of cascade to be these other impacts. All right, well, we only have 3 minutes left, but I think we can get to Emily's question here. In terms of battling NIMBY or not in my backyard arguments that crime may increase or property values may decrease, do you engage these perceptions in community discussions? I'm currently looking into the truth and falsehoods in the literature of the impacts on these kinds of things.
Chris, can you help me with this one? Because you deal more with the locals.
NIMBYism is always going to be a thing, that is for sure. And as far as the literature goes, one of the first papers I ever wrote 15 years ago was with City Councilor Elaine Clegg, that was funded by the Urban Land Institute. And we surveyed like 12 different infill developments in the Treasure Valley to see if property value, because that's the number one thing NIMBYs say is my property values are going to go down when this thing goes in. And it's almost never true. The literature's got to be, I haven't looked at the literature, frankly, in 15 years, but it's got to be replete with stories about how crime and property devaluation just don't happen surrounding these projects. The nice thing that we have nowadays, frankly, are a couple of cool movements. One called YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard, and another one called YIGBY, which is Yes in God's Backyard, where you have pastors and churches all across the country taking all of the churches own a huge amount of land. I mean, the Mormon Church and the Catholic Church own vast tracts. And these are people who can turn parking lots and what kind of things quickly into housing solutions like we've looked at. And so those are some things that are happening, I think, that are pluses in the battle against the NIMBYs. The other one is the bananas. Those are the really hardcore NIMBYs. Those are the build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. The bananas.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming here. Everyone can do their virtual applauses. We really enjoyed having everyone, and all the questions were really interesting. So it was super relevant. We're just excited about the work you're doing and collaborating with HCRI however we can. So please, everyone, feel free. Oh, go ahead.
If there were questions that we didn't answer, I threw my email into the chat.
Great.
So you can just forward that over to me.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining, and come to our final one next month. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson and Brittany.
Thank you.